you want to introduce yourself, and can you give some background to what made you write the blog on leaving the SJW cult and finding myself?
Sure. My name is Keri, and well, what made me write the article was it was a culmination of things. I've kind of been going through a change in the way I view the world and how to be in it. I know that sounds kind of flippant, but it's been a really serious change in the way my whole perspective with how I identify. Even I don't know whether to call myself a classical liberal now or what, but I started seeing things differently, and I also started seeing, after the election particularly, I started seeing a lot of support for violence from people in my circles on the left, and so that was really concerning to me, and I see more of it every day. I feel like there's this effort underway to somehow justify physical violence as a response to speech. And the more that I saw that, the more uncomfortable I became. And the article itself was impulsive. I wrote it the day I posted it after seeing it. And yeah, I saw a friend, he shared that the screen grab that I included in the article. And it was just a litany of people he wanted to kill. It said kill Trump, kill Ivanka, kill... It was like 11 people or something that he wanted to kill. And in the same breath, he said something like, I'm a tolerant pacifist. Which, yeah, it's kind of, it's really disconcerting that you can have, someone could be that blind to their own hypocrisy. So I've started to comment to him, and instead it turned into an essay, and I felt, okay, I'm not afraid to share these feelings anymore, so I'm just going to publish this somewhere.
Yeah, in the blog you quoted Nietzsche, he who fights monsters, etc. I think a lot of us are familiar with that. But then you say, when you believe you are morally superior, when you have dehumanized those you disagree with, you can justify almost anything. And this statement is how I have always thought of the extreme religious and political right for most of my life. It is a disturbing trend that this now applies to some on the left. Do you see it that way, or have some other thoughts about that? I mean, it kind of dovetails in what you just talked about with the violent tendencies.
Yeah, I do see it that way now. And I actually just recently learned the term the horseshoe effect, and which sort of says that political spectrum is not linear. It's more like a horseshoe, so that people on the far right have a lot more in common with people on the far left than they may realize. And that clicked with me as well. That made a lot of sense to me, because I feel like this part of the left is they have a lot in common with the very far right. They're authoritarian in nature. When I was a kid, I remember it being conservatives who told us what we could and couldn't listen to, or what we should and shouldn't listen to, like what video games were bad and what music was bad. And now I feel like it's the left doing that. It's the left that's trying to censor ideas and thoughts and tell us what's acceptable and what's not. And so, yeah, I do see a lot of similarity there.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it is. It seems to be getting out of hand, and in normal, everyday conversations in real life and online, people are just they're automatically, everyone's a racist. Everything, we see these memes, Anita Sarkeesian, etc. But we're hearing that, we're seeing it every day, and it's getting. It seems like they don't want us. I consider myself part of the left. I've always been kind of liberal, but they're like driving me away.
I feel the same way. I was saying the other day to a friend, I feel like there's going to be, if the 2020 election were held tomorrow, I think Trump would win, and not just the electoral vote, but the popular vote. I think they are alienating people, and it's not enough for them to attack the right anymore. Now they have to attack. They've moved towards attacking people in the center and people in the left who maybe are not on board with this authoritarian version of the left. And so that's how I view it anyway. It's almost, I think Professor Jordan Peterson, are you familiar with him?
Very. I was gonna bring him up.
Yeah. So he has he has a way of describing it, and one of his videos was really helpful for me early on, maybe 6 months or so ago. I saw a video of his about, I think it was called "Where Do SJWs Come From?" And it was about some of his research with a graduate student of his into personality predictors of PC belief systems. And he sort of separated the PC movement into what he termed PC authoritarians and PC egalitarians. And that was very illuminating for me, because I feel like a lot of people, and I know I probably disagree with him on this, but I think a lot of people who are caught up in this SJW version of the left are in it for what they believe to be good reasons. I do believe they're good, well-intentioned. They think they're on the side of good. They think that they're helping oppressed people, but what they're actually doing is acting as a mouthpiece for the authoritarians, in this group, who don't have good intentions. I don't believe that the authoritarians, I don't believe they're well-intentioned. I believe that they have no problem with oppression. They just want to be the ones oppressing.
Well, I think like up to 50 years ago, there was always a battle between the incrementalists and the people that wanted immediate change. In other words, if things are wrong, let's change it. And then you had people, some moderates in Congress, in politics, that wanted to just slowly, they didn't want to rock the boat too much. But right now, that's what we're kind of talking about, is that if you don't agree with everything I say, you're an incrementalist, and therefore you're evil, you're racist now, you're it's politically correct on steroids now.
Yeah. And it's very much like a religion. I mean, that's why I use the word cult. It feels like leaving a cult. I was raised Southern Baptist, conservative Southern Baptist, which was pretty fundamentalist in some ways, and I left that ideology behind in my my late teens. And this feels to me sort of a similar transformation, in that I can see it now from a perspective that I couldn't see it when I was in it, where it has its own dogma, its own concept of original sin. People go out and bear witness, and there are a lot of things that I find eerily similar to religion. So, which is ironic, because I know a lot of the people who consider themselves, who I believe are SJWs, consider themselves to be atheists.
Yeah, that's the irony. You came to the conclusion that it was better to lose friends or even a job wanting to be honest about how you feel. This is called integrity. But was the important part realizing that they weren't true friends, or the job wasn't good for you?
I think it was a little of both. Yeah, I was afraid for a long time to sort of share some of my new opinions, or there's this self-censorship that happens in SJW circles, in academia, online, and so I definitely felt like, I would maybe read an interesting article that I wanted to share, and then felt, oh no, I can't share this. I'll be called a bigot, which sounds ridiculous if you look at some of the articles I've shared that maybe would cause someone to call someone that. But yeah, so I was silent for a while because of fear, and I would say probably 6 months that I was thinking about things in a different way before I wrote the article. So I don't know exactly what led to getting over the fear. I think it was just during those 6 months I kept reading, and I started listening to other sources, and I attend a spiritual center. That sounds kind of cheesy, but I was trying to focus on my inner work, I guess, and I thought a lot about my own reaction to things and my emotional reaction to things, and so all this time, I guess, the fear was dissipating. I just didn't realize it. So the day I wrote the article was the first day I realized, hey, I'm not afraid to share this, and but I absolutely understand the fear. I've had people write me since I wrote the article who say, several people on the left who say, I'm in academia, and your article really resonates with me, but I'm afraid to share it. Or I work in entertainment, and your article resonates with me, but I'm afraid to share it. So, and I've told those people I understand the fear, because it gripped me for a while too, but the one thing I'll say that's hopefully encouraging those people is, however you figure out how to get past it on the other side of it, it's so much more liberating. Like, I don't know about you, but it's so much better not to have to go, oh, I wonder what people will think if I, share this opinion.
Yeah, I never see. I didn't even know all these terms and SJWs and social, and I was leaning. I was starting to head. My life was starting to head in that direction. Well, are you a feminist? And well, of course, I believe in equality for everybody. Then I kept getting corrected. Well, I don't like. Why would you correct? What isn't that what it's about? I believe in equality for every single person. I don't think a woman. I don't think whatever your skin color, your religion, and anything. There's no person that should have any rights more or less than anyone else. But yet that wasn't good enough, and that was when I started understanding the and I didn't know the terminology, but the identity politics and the intersectionalism. But you couldn't getting corrected when you talked about somebody that you had no life experiences as a religion or a skin color, and yet those very people I'm leading up to something. Those very people would be talking crap about everyone that they couldn't possibly have any experiences being.
Exactly.
And you've seen that, and it's frightening. It's worse than a cult in some ways.
It is, because they're actually promoting the very thing they say they're against. So I don't believe you can end racism with more racism. But conveniently, they get around that, because one of the tenets of the SJW religion is that it's impossible to be racist towards white people. The same thing with sexism. I don't think you end sexism with more sexism, but hey, guess what? It's impossible to be sexist towards men. So we can say whatever we want about them and treat them in whatever way we want,
Well, because they've changed the definition from discrimination to discrimination with power.
A lot of it is about them controlling the language and the definitions. So they started, I learned, so I'm aging myself here, but I'm not one of the younger SJWs. I'm in my late 30s. I learned the power equals, no, it's the ism, any kind of ism equals power plus prejudice. And I learned that in college. So that idea, they started changing the definition of isms a while ago. So that they've already managed to do that, I think, in large ways in the culture. And so now I think what they're trying to do, if you look at the language they're trying to change, I started seeing this concept everywhere lately that, your speech is violence. and if you look at any of the speakers who've been canceled on college campuses, you'll usually see the reason they're being canceled is because the SJW protesters and professors in some cases are even saying, oh, well, we don't want to, this isn't about free speech. What they're going to say is hate speech. It's violent, so we can't allow it. Well, how do you know it's hate speech if they haven't given the speech yet? A, and B, it's why are you suddenly calling language violent? And I think the reason is because then they feel okay justifying physical violence as a response to it.
Well,
if you look at what happened,
that's a new thing. That's a new thing, like punching Richard Spencer.
Exactly. They say it's okay to punch Nazis.
He's odious, but it's kind of the core part of modern civilization is that vigilantism is not a good thing.
Because where does it end? And that's my question for them is, okay, they're like, well, it's okay to punch Nazis, while at the same time they're expanding the definition of who is a Nazi. So I had one guy in a discussion, he was defending this concept of punching Nazis, and I was sort of arguing with him like, I don't see Nazis marching around everywhere in the state. Like, where are all the Nazis? Nobody. Richard Spencer is a loon. I doubt he has. I don't think he has a significant following. And so, who are all these Nazis it's okay to punch? And this person actually said that all Trump supporters are Nazi sympathizers. I'm like, so 53 million people, however many people voted for Trump, are okay to target with violence? It's absurd. So, and I don't see an end to that. When you start thinking that way, that it's okay to punch certain people for their beliefs, then where does it end? And I asked that question, and this person said, well, I have self-control. I'm like, oh.
Well, the biggest point is who gets to decide with all these issues. Who gets to
Yeah.
decide? And so if we have some standard that we go by, equality, what is racism, what is a bad person, and we all agree on it. But if somebody gets to decide, if somebody's the ultimate moral arbiter, then we have this Orwellian world where the target can change, the rules can change at a moment's notice, and with the genders and the intersectionality, they are changing, and then
Hmm.
Jordan Peterson, I brought up him complaining about, well, people can just change their genders on a whim, and then I could get in trouble, and I was laughed at, but I got out my phone and showed these bracelets so your friends can identify from hour to hour what gender you are. So it's they can move the target, and we get into the oppression Olympics. It ties right into that. The entire professional victim mentality. We just saw that with Anita Sarkeesian at the VidCon, where the Sargon of Akkad had the crime of sitting still. Um, I called
Yeah.
it.
I
They called it power sitting,
Power City.
and and
I
I
I caught up on that briefly, and I was trying to. I was like, "Where's the video of what he did to her?" Because I saw the video of her calling him a garbage human and other terrible names, and I was like, "So what did he do to that happened right before this?" Nothing. That's why there's no video. He's just sitting there.
well, there's now memes floating. There's a ton of them, but criticizing Anita is harassment, and asking a question is harassment. Now sitting is harassment, and I added thinking the question is now and sitting is now harassment. So no, they there was a statement put out by I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy responsible for VidCon, taking Anita's side and apologizing to her, and these were awful people that plotted against you. I'm terribly paraphrasing it, but I was appalled by that.
Yeah, I saw that he basically said he alluded to some greater context that the sitting there had some other kind of meaning because of this greater context. That's what I mean, or I think that's what I think is so dangerous about them changing the language in the way that they have, is because now you can argue something completely irrational like that he was oppressing her by sitting, that he was somehow abusing her or harassing her. She's the one that called him horrible names. It's pretty cut and dry. But no, we live in this world where I don't know. It's almost like manipulating reality to suit the ideology.
Well, we can have a reasonable discussion that what was his intent, which you can't get into someone's head. And there was a whole bunch of them. They said the first video I saw was 3 rows of shitlords, but and that could have been intimidating to Anita. We can have a real discussion about that, but that wasn't the discussion. The discussion was him sitting there was harassment, because like with these cancellations, you mentioned these cancellations on campus. They're now mind readers.
Hmm.
Like it ties into this whole thing with okay, so President Obama was a secret Muslim. Now religion is self-professing, and he said he was a Christian, so I take him at his word. And then so we have Muslims who blow up. They commit suicide, kill people in the name of Islam. They say that. They say Allahu Akbar. But then these same people say, oh, they're not real Muslims. So they're mind readers. And that's what happened here. We had a mind reader. Anita was a mind reader, and she knew that he had ill intent.
Yeah, it's assuming intent, and which is ironic because they also say that intent doesn't matter. So if you say something and they say, "Hey, I find that sexist. I'm offended," you say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. That wasn't my intent." Intent doesn't matter. It's contradictory. They have all these tenets are very contradictory.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson. It's just crazy. All this stuff got me into this. When I started, I found this stuff online. It all started with, believe it or not, somebody. I think it was somebody commented at Bigfoot about Bigfoot commenting on the last Reason rally. So I'm watching his video, and I remember Bigfoot from years ago for his what stupid things creationists say videos or something. I didn't really know him that well, and I thought his video was really, at the time, was really offensive until I started looking into when you only know one side of the story. And he claimed that the SJWs hijacked the Reason rally, and that's why the attendance was so poor compared to 4 years before. And then I started noticing all the other. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. The other skeptical and atheist conventions with all these rules and everything that they, these absurd rules that I go to conferences and, geez, if I saw the rules that you can't go around raping people and stuff, I'd be a little worried about what kind of conference it was.
Right.
That's what Bigfoot was, and other people had brought up, that it's a little troubling, especially when I think the elevator gate thing happened outside of the event, had nothing to do with the event itself. And I've never seen I've been to a lot of secular events, and I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen people harassing anyone acting out. Everyone's always polite. You feel like I always felt like I'm with a big family, of people that are like-minded. I don't know if you're.
I'm not familiar with Bigfoot or the Reason Rally, or what was the elevator thing you mentioned?
Elevator gate.
But I don't have to be, because I can imagine, because it happens everywhere now. I mean, I saw someone share the other day, here's a list of rules on a professional astronomer Facebook page, and it was a list, just a litany of these SJW rules about when you engage in conversations with fellow astronomers here, make sure that you recognize your position of privilege. And it was this whole thing about privilege checking and oppressed groups and
and watch the shirt you wear.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt like, wow, like I'm like, they're coming for the astronomers, and the guy who shared it was like, no, they've already gotten the astronomers. Like, but they've infiltrated so many places is how it be. I saw, you mentioned Brett
Weinstein.
Yeah, I saw some of those videos, and I wasn't surprised. And I think there are going to be more things like that happening. But I think it's good that the videos came out, because I think a lot of people are not aware of what's been happening on college campuses and the kind of indoctrination that kids are going through. And so I hope that more, every time something like this happens, I hope people record it and put it out there, so maybe it'll wake some more people up. I have a lot of friends on the left who are not really in this particular SJW echo chamber, or at least they say they don't see it as often as I do. And I sort of feel like, well, you're going to see it soon, because they're going to come for you eventually. You either convert, confess your sin, which is your various privileges, and then go forth and convert others, or you become thrown out, you become blacklisted, or they throw you in the basket of deplorables.
It seems to be more on college campuses, and from my personal perspective, as upper middle class white people who are running around. This is personally, not just online, with the Black Lives Matter thing, and I agree with some of the things with Black Lives Matter. I don't like how they're going about a lot of things. I'm with David Pakman. When he first objected to that one silly thing they did at that one rally for Orlando, they were all over him just because he criticized. How can you? And the funny thing is, David Pakman who has Jewish ancestry, and he's English is his second. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's from he was born in Argentina and came here as an immigrant. Got called a white supremacist. So, so his family, I believe, escaped Europe. Anyway, yeah, that's crazy stuff. And I'm sorry.
I was going to say anybody can be called. They've taken all meaning out of words as well. So I saw people calling Bernie Sanders a white supremacist for suggesting that perhaps identity politics shouldn't be at the forefront of our platform. And Bernie Sanders is a white supremacist now, then everyone's a white. Like, the words don't mean anything, you know. Everyone's a Nazi. Everyone's a white supremacist now. Everyone's a misogynist. I feel like they've sucked the marrow out of out of a lot of language.
Well, they're it's like Ouroboros. It's like a snake eating its own tail, and I've said this in a few of my videos that it's going to get their side is going to get smaller and smaller because they're going to be alienating everybody. You know, there's a very small percent of the population that's transgender or gender non-binary. I think it's like less than 1%, and I think that's what we're going to end up with. That these people are going to have to represent the smallest sliver of the population because everyone's going to be alienated because we're all white supremacist or patriarchal or racist, or you know, and that's the thing. I wasn't a fan of Donald Trump, but I was appalled at all the name calling. After he was elected, and everybody was a racist, and geez, I thought that was horrible. That's, you know, that's the way to win people over, is to, you know, call them horrible. I mean, racist is, you know, historically is not a nice thing to be called, right?
It's a what I've some commenter shared with me. His term for it is a new slur. It's a way to you're calling someone when you're calling someone a bigot, you're attacking their character as a person. And I think that's just, you end all discussion there. You're not going to win hearts and minds that way. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. And after the election, I was trying to figure out, how did he win? It took me by surprise. Like, I think it did a lot of people. And so, I saw a lot of friends on social media and in real life, you know, who were handling it in all various ways. You know, some who went into deep depression, and some who became, I think, more authoritarian and angry, and everybody was kind of dealing with it in a different way. And the way I was dealing with it was trying to understand what happened. And so that's when I started reading more and exposing myself to, you know, getting out of my bubble, I'll put it that way. I'm rambling now. I promise I was going somewhere too. Now I'm forgetting. What were you talking about right before this?
Well, it kind of, well, what I was gonna steer it into the because I think it's happening now. Everyone's seeing it. The Lacey Green, the red pilling thing, and the reaction from her fans and supporters. They've gone into the shrill hysterics. She's betrayed them. What was the one tweet that she threw all the marginalized people under the bus, and people are commenting, oh no, she's thousands of marginalized people under the bus, and the joke is she's now murdered thousands of people. But this is hysterical, what's going on. I don't mean funny.
Yeah, it's hysteria. I wasn't familiar with her until after I published the article, because then people were telling me, have you heard of her? You should check out what's happening with her. And, you know, and then they also suggested I watch the Red Pill film, which I did. And I do feel like there are people now who are starting to wake up. And the more that people are, the more people that speak up without fear of the consequences, I think we maybe stand a chance. I maybe have a little more pessimistic view than you. I think it's more than a sliver of the left. Because it's already, in my mind, it's already taken over the colleges. But beyond that, I work in entertainment, and it's infiltrated entertainment. I mean, I work in comedy, and it's kind of, I guess, I I was one of the first comedy managers to use social justice to market my clients, which now sounds ridiculous to me, but at the time I believe wholeheartedly in these things. I'm like, I believe in comedy with a message, and I believe in comedy that seeks to change the world, and so what I saw happen over time, though, was that then it started. You started seeing more and more comedians marketing themselves this way, and now I see comics who are hilarious, who I know to be hilarious, who are doing this just boring, social justice themed comedy there's nothing new or edgy about it, and it's preachy, and it's become something I never saw it becoming. And so
well, I
yeah.
didn't. What I was suggesting was that it will become a sliver. I'm not. Trust me, I'm not as optimistic as you think. But I think that they're eating their own with the Rebecca Tuval article in, a feminist writer in Hypatia, and how they devoured her. And what happens is, it's like, I don't know if you're a student of history or a fan of history, but the witch trials, and it's like a virus. As soon as somebody in a town, in a village, gets accused, you know what happens. It runs through the village like a virus, and destroys everyone, because the only way for you to have a quick ending to your life is to name people. Now, in a village in, say, the 14th or 16th century Europe, the only people you knew lived in your house or in your neighborhood. So you named all your friends and family, and it just would go through. And this is, they, with the Lacey Green thing, now Lacey Green knew what she was doing. She went into it with her eyes open. She knew the consequences, and she expressed this. She was reaching out to anti-feminists. She calls them the antis. But somebody like Rebecca Tuval and others are writing what, I would gag at the article, with the with the Rachel Dolezal thing and everything, and she's, intersectionality and everything, but then they devoured her because of all these ridiculous claims they made about her, and that's what I mean by, like, it'll get to the point where to be the pure ones will be such a small percent, because everyone will be the witches,
Yeah. Or everyone just stays silent, like in the Soviet Union. I kind of feel, when you mentioned the witch trials, I just started reading the Gulag Archipelago, because Jordan Peterson suggested it, of course, and it's very dense for me. It's not my typical kind of reading, but I'm trudging through it, and it when they talk about the kulaks, am I pronouncing this right? The kulaks and the pod kulaks, right, and the pod kulaks were basically, it was a word that meant, kulak sympathizer, and I feel like I see obvious parallels to that now with this part of the left wanting to call the right Nazis or Nazi sympathizers. They keep expanding the definition of who's the who's the wrong thinker. But yeah, I see people censoring themselves on the left, though. That's what we have to get past. The more people like Lacey or Casey who speak up, I think the better chances we have. And Dave Rubin.
Yes. He just got named as was a white nationalist or something.
Called part of the far right.
Far right. That's what it was.
But I was so excited when I found Dave Rubin, because here's a liberal who's making a lot of sense and who's a little alarmed at some of the same things I've become alarmed about. And he was one of the first ones I found where I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only liberal who thinks some of this is crazy. So
I think a lot of us, for me, it was watching Sam Harris on Bill Maher with the Ben Affleck thing. I just couldn't. Like the rest of the world, most of us think that almost everybody is good people, that there's Christians and Muslims and Jews and etc. aren't running around horrible trying to kill people, and yet you're Islamophobic if you criticize a religion. I criticize all religions, but when I saw that, I was just that got me thinking that, wait a minute, the left, the left has gone crazy here, and that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. Because in the Islamic world, because it's so terrible for women and for gays and free thinkers, doesn't mean that all this patriarchy in the West is good. Which I think we've come a long way. I don't think there's this horrible patriarchy that's crushing people. But the irony is, and this comes up all the time in the SJW community, is that the worst people in the world. I mean, if you're gay or transgender and went to Iran or I forget which countries, they throw you off of buildings for. In Iran, they make you have a transgender surgery, or sit in prison or what have you. But the laws are different, and yet they bend over backwards to stick up for this poor minority, which they're not a minority, like 1.6 billion people in the world.
Yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure what's happening there. I do think it's the word Islamophobia is a made-up word that they use to basically stomp out any type of criticism of the more extreme part of the religion. And without the ability to criticize the extreme part of the religion, then you're actually lumping all Muslims in together. I think that's actually much more offensive to say, Islamic terrorists are we can't criticize that what Islam has to do with their terrorism, because that would somehow be insulting to my moderate Muslim friend. No, it won't be. She's not a terrorist. She's not. It's completely different. Christianity, we were able to over the years criticize the more extreme elements of it and modernize it. And I think what's also interesting to me is those within Islam who are attempting to moderate it are now being called Islamophobes. I don't know.
The Southern Poverty Law Center. Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali are now part of a hate group.
Yeah, a lot of white elite liberals are now telling Majid Nawaz that he's an Islamophobe. It just blows my mind.
It's amazing. In Europe and the United States, and many other parts of the world, South America, we no longer, it's no longer okay. That's a Christian part of the world, and majority Christian, and it's no longer okay to just stone somebody for being an adulterer because a woman cut her hair without permission from her husband, or we don't do stuff like that. Whereas in parts of the world where Sharia law reigns supreme, you can do that, and they have the honor killings and the honor rapes, and so the Enlightenment has tamed Christianity, and that hasn't happened in the Islamic part of the world. And the biggest victims, yes, there are victims in the West of terrorism, but the biggest victims are the millions and millions of people in Islamic countries that are trapped. Yeah.
And it's very, I don't know, something about it's just so condescending. It's so paternalistic to say, we're not going to allow you to, tame those elements of your religion because that would be bigoted. No, let the same thing that's played out with Christianity, like you mentioned, like taming these more extreme elements, that has to play out in Islam. So I'm not sure, but like I said, I'm not sure exactly what's happening there. I've seen some people say the reason why the SJWs are now aligning with or protecting radical Islamists is because both seek the destruction of the West. And that on some deep level seems to make sense to me. I'm like, they have a common underlying goal, even if they're not aware of it. It's something that's operating within them that they may not be aware of. I think a lot of people in the social justice left are not really aware of who's pulling their strings or why what the end goal is.
It's a perspective too, because in the United States, Muslims are a minority, so they're part of a protected species. They're the brown people. You're a racist if you're against the religion, even though I think most Muslims aren't. In Indonesia and other parts of the world, there's more Muslims, Malaysia, but so they're like a protected class because there's a couple percent of the population, and it's not they're not a minority. They're I think what the second biggest religion in the world.
Yeah, and so they definitely, it plays into this U.S. perspective of the oppression Olympics, as you mentioned it, on that in the caste system of SJWs. They are one of the protected groups, and so that's certainly playing into it. I'm not sure about. Did you see the article about the Pride Parade, the Dyke March? That
Yes,
picked up the Jewish.
yes.
Yeah, because they said that the Jewish lesbians were creating an unsafe environment, and that is another one of those things that I think will maybe start to wake some people up, like what's happening there. And so some of my friends who aren't as aware of they don't maybe keep up with what's been happening on college campuses, or they're not really in this part of the left. They hear news like that, and it shakes them in a little, like, what's that about? That's kind of absurd, Or the Pride March where the Black Lives Matter protesters
shut it down,
or got into a scuffle with police. There was 11 cops injured in one of the cities, I think I read, and I think that tends to wake people up, because it's like, wait a minute, are we eating our own? What's happening here?
Well, the reactions I've been getting from people that I know personally about this new pride flag with the brown and the black stripe is they're appalled. People that have them on their car dangling from their mirror, and they're appalled by it. These are people in the LGBTQ community are just they're like, what was the flag supposed to represent? It was supposed to represent everybody, and now they're trying to hijack that. And so that's what I mean about the splintering. These are their natural allies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will start to splinter more. But yeah, the pride flag thing kind of cracks me up. Because it's a rainbow. It represents everyone. There was no white in the flag.
Right. No peach, right?
Right? I don't understand. Yeah.
I think most of us, this is not the 1950s in America. This is not the 14th century France. And I think this is 2017, and most of us are on board. You see people on the political right that have no problem with people just living their own lives. The conversation has been moved so far to civilization that we got the gay wedding cake thing, that's popping up, or the restroom issue. But most of us are in the same camp where we don't think that. I mean, I was raised what I consider a racist home, but yet we were raised to believe that to act and behave respectful to everyone, to every single person, not excluding anyone. That's how we were raised, and even people that don't like other people still have a sense of morals, and yet these SJWs don't seem to understand. They think either you're with us or you're the enemy, and it reminds me of George W. Bush after 9/11.
Yeah, they're very much all about words instead of actions. So they can say any number of things they believe in, but how they treat you is much more revealing. And they don't believe that to be the case. In fact, I've seen entire opinion pieces written by SJWs saying, civility is a white supremacist concept, and if you ask for, and if you're ever in a disagreement with an SJW and they start calling you names or attacking your character or otherwise behaving hatefully, and if you try to calm it down or say, hey, could we continue to interact civilly, then they'll accuse you of tone policing. They have any number of words they can use to kind of try to raise themselves up above you, take the moral high ground while claiming that you're a bigot. So if you even point out the fact that they're behaving pretty abhorrently, then you're a tone police.
There was a time in Europe and in America where people really did have a hard time depending on the accident of birth, and I mean, we had, okay, it doesn't mean racism is dead, but we had Barack Obama as president for 8 years, and Hillary Clinton was running for president. So this is not some bizarre society where we keep certain people in basements and lock them up. This is a pretty, and yet the rhetoric coming out from the left, from the far left, is this horrible patriarchal, racist, cishet white male thing that um, you know. But before I think maybe
Can I say something about that?
yeah.
It's almost as if, see, the reason why I think we're as a culture, as a society, we've been able to progress so much and to leave so much of the ugliness of our history behind, and I think we're continuing to do so, is because of the tools of our democracy and the beliefs of, because of the foundation that Western civilization has laid for us. And so it's almost as if they want to destroy the very tools that allow us all to be free and to keep progressing, and they want to destroy the system itself.
It looks like that. The people in power gave up that supposed power when the right to vote was extended to not just landowning white males, but everyone else. And it took a long time. But they're the ones that gave it up. They gave it up. And when we had the equal rights in the '60s, people, it was just when slavery was ended, it was because it was just its time had come. It was a bad idea. And we started out talking about incrementalism, and it's sometimes change is slow, and like you said, we've really evolved, and it's because of the fact that we're in a liberal democracy that we're able to have this life for almost everybody.
Right.
I think there are people that are left out, but it's such a small percent. But every year, every decade, less people are being left out of the American dream, and I think there was a report recently that poverty in the world has actually decreased in the last few decades.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also that portion of the left I was talking about earlier, the PC authoritarians. I don't believe they seek equality. I think they seek power. So it makes sense to me when thinking about it from that perspective that they want to destroy the very tools which have given us equality and hopefully greater equality. As we move forward, they don't want equality. They want to be on top.
Well, you mean like, for example, like when people criticize the modern feminism, first wave feminism, great thing. Second wave feminism, wonderful. But the third wave feminism, now they want to strip power from people and have some people be less equal. That's what you're talking about?
That's what I'm starting to believe. I was raised in third wave feminism. That's I've until recently considered myself a third wave feminist. But looking at things in a different way now, it's well, look at it on a micro scale. In a conversation, for example, what I see a lot is if I'm a woman, because I'm a woman, I'm in this protected class, so I have the upper hand in any conversation with a man, and I can engage in conversation in completely bad faith, and
I'm not allowed to interrupt.
Exactly. And I can call you any number of things, and I can behave in a way that doesn't align with my supposed belief system. But I can be sexist towards you, but it's not really sexism, So, and I think a lot of people have started to abuse that because we've come to believe these definitions. Now I see people abusing them constantly, using terms like, they have a whole litany of terms they can use to shut down discussion while also making you the bad guy.
Do you think the tools behind that is some are saying it's postmodernism, that whole deconstructing and reconstructing? You can write your own, because it's all nonsense, and you can write your own rules.
I do, actually. There are other people that are able to speak about the postmodernism influence than I am, and but I do believe it does make sense to me that this sort of there's no one right way to interpret the world, so nothing. It's almost a kind of, I think it's linked to nihilism in a way too. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's countless ways to view the world, and so there's no one right way to view it. And that paper you mentioned earlier, where I forget the feminist name. Rebecca Tuvel, yeah, where they all piled on her.
Ugh.
That was interesting to me because she used the very arguments of that are accepted currently in this movement about transgenderism, and she used them about transracialism.
Exactly.
And she wasn't comparing the two. She was using the same arguments to talk about the other, and they work in both cases. And the reason they piled on her is because that's not yet acceptable within the movement. They haven't fought out this contradiction yet, and I think they will at some point. As soon as there start to be a lot more people claiming to be other races, I think that's also going to be a big wake-up call for people.
Well, so, I think the biggest sin she committed, other than not getting the advice and consent from people that are better than her, the people, people of color or what have you, but the big sin was that she compared the transgender thing, the whole gender thing, with transracialism, and there I think that's what you're alluding to, that you created. They've opened it up to be completely destroyed by comparing the two, and she didn't compare the two.
Yeah, she didn't. She used the same argument
logic,
to defend the concept of, and that was just too much for them, But I think we're heading in a place where it's like it's going to be really hard to define anything anymore. I didn't realize in this conversation with you I was going to start thinking about language in this way. But yeah, I think that the way they have manipulated the language and co-opted the language is really important. I don't know. You're giving me a lot to think about.
Well, I want to wrap it up, but I had a bunch of topics, and maybe we could do a quick thing on a few of them, like safe spaces.
Safe spaces. Well, you know what? Van Jones did a great video about this, that, college is not supposed to be a safe space. You're supposed to have your ideas challenged so that you can become stronger. And the more you have your ideas challenged, that you either you develop stronger arguments, you become more solid in your belief, or you adjust your beliefs, or you discard them. But it's a good thing to have your beliefs challenged. I don't think liberals know how to defend ideas anymore, because it's the conservatives on campuses who are often having to defend themselves. So the whole idea of safe spaces to me is ridiculous, and I think it's a way to discriminate against people.
On campus, I think it is ridiculous. I don't see any reason why, if you're at home with people like yourselves, if people you feel comfortable with, like people of the same religion or the same sex or the same skin color, a bunch of guys going camping or whatever, maybe that's a safe space and that's something you create for yourself. But when you get in, when it goes, you immediately thought of the university, the campus situation, which is exactly right. It's not you're not supposed to be coddled and they have, with the microaggressions now, the professors are afraid to talk about anything because anything can be a microaggression.
Mm-hmm. Microaggression is another one of these made-up concepts in my mind. I used to believe in. I no longer. I mean, I understand the idea behind it, that yes, someone can say something that on its face doesn't sound sexist, but I take it as sexist because it's almost a benevolent sexism, maybe. Like, okay, if a man tries to explain something to me, there's this new word now that's much like microaggressions, it's mansplaining.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's an easy way to constantly, in my mind, to play the victim, to look for something in everything that happens to you. If a man explains something to me that I already know, I can just, thank you, sir, I already know. It's not such a big deal to me that, like, oh, he's offending me on some, it's so sexist. Like, well, I think some people want to walk around with this
the victim
pain.
Yeah,
they want to live in their pain, and this is where the spiritual stuff that I've been reading comes into account for me. Eckhart Tolle writes a lot about the pain body, and that's what he calls it. And I really believe a lot of people are living in their pain body these days, where they're going out, they've made their whole life about this one painful thing that's happened to them, or maybe several painful things, but they've built a story, they've built their identity around their pain, and so they're out there looking for more of it, or they're looking to deal it out to you. But it's chosen. It's something you choose to do. It's not the patriarchy, and it's not the I think one of the quotes I read was, pain is inevitable, but the suffering, if you choose to prolong your suffering or not. And so I feel like a lot of the SJWs could use maybe a shift in perspective on how to look at their own pain and the way that they interact in the world.
Do you think that, I mean, part of that is it's a perspective. To me, it's always a perspective. So from my point of view, if you're just rude to somebody, if a man is talking to a woman and is rude, that's rude. If they're mansplaining, and they're just having a normal conversation. So if a man is condescending to a woman, and let me just turn it around, if a woman is condescending to a man, it's rude. And if you ask somebody where you're from, now somebody has a heavy accent, they don't look like you, they're in California, they're in Michigan, and you ask them where they're from, well, that's all of a sudden you're racist, you're bigoted. But we ask people where they're from all the time. Are you from Minnesota? Are you from Canada? And it's not a bad thing. So I think if you intend it as like there's a rude thing if you mean to otherize somebody, to alienate somebody by where they're from, and it's a common sense thing. This mansplaining, this microaggression. If you're just rude, it's rude, right?
I agree, and the question of like where are you from? I mean, that's a way to get to know someone. I think I saw, maybe it was Bering who did a great video about microaggressions, but it's like that's a courteous thing. When I meet you, am I not supposed to be interested in you at all? Is that not more offensive? Should I just ignore any differences between us? And it's almost like they all want to be pod people. Like, we're all the same,
Well, it's exciting. Somebody's from, if you lived in one spot your whole life and somebody's obviously from the other side of the world, you want to find out more. Like you said, find out more. Where are you from? And that's like a courtesy, and getting to know people. But now it's an awful thing to alienate, to otherize somebody by asking them where they're from. But that's now a microaggression. And I understand if you're being rude, trying to do that to somebody, but it's such a normal thing to, like you said, to get to know somebody.
Mm-hmm. I think most of the people who use these terms, also the ones who are upset about this, in most cases, I think they're very elite minority of people, and like you mentioned on some of the college campuses, it's usually very privileged white people, I find, who are now arguing, coming in like the white knight and arguing on behalf of marginalized groups, and preaching to other white people in an attempt to convert them. And sometimes it just kind of takes me back. Like, do you remember the incident at Yale about the Halloween costumes?
Yes.
That was one of the first things that kind of stuck with me for a long time. Before my views started changing, that stuck with me, because you're in like the 1% of the 1%. You're at Yale. Like,
exactly.
And I don't know. I meet people from all over the world pretty frequently who they don't use these words. They don't talk about, they're happy to talk about where they're from and hear about where I'm from. And, I don't know. I think it's just seeking to be offended and seeking to constantly be defined by your own pain.
Well, you're talking about the cultural appropriation issue.
Yeah, that too. The cultural appropriation issue. That's another thing I no longer believe to be real.
It's beaten into the ground. How could we not survive if we don't? I love spaghetti. It's silly.
It's silly because that's the way that I mean, that's the way that we learn from each other. That's the way we keep peace is by cultural exchange. And, so I think that, I think it's a bit of nonsense. By the way, DT, after this video, I'm not going to have any friends left.
Well, okay. Well, it's so, but it was really nice having this discussion with you. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and talking.